Hello. Our story begins inside the Death Star over Endor. Everything was going per his plans. Sidious rose from his throne and continued to follow the young Jedi and his father in their engagement. Luke had a fire ignite within his body, one at the mere question of his sister's life. He swung his lightsaber aggressively at his father, pushing him across the throne room chambers as he watched his power in full strength. Luke had no moment to think. He was only allowing his fear to dictate his drive. He caught Vader and forced him across the walkway from the elevator in the center of the chamber. Luke swung down, forcing Vader to duck out of the way until a number of swift strikes completely disarmed his father. Sidious prepared to cackle, watching Vader fall victim to his own son, but silence rose over him. He knew that to disrupt Luke from this triumph would give him a sense of control. There could be no control. Sidious needed Luke to seal this kill. Afterwards, there could be laughs, though for a short moment, everything went still. Sidious watched Luke raise his lightsaber over his head, preparing to jab it down on his defenseless father. He could feel the fight on the surface of Endor deteriorating, and he could foresee an A-Wing starship crashing through the bridge of the Executor. Sidious came back to the moment and looked down at the young Jedi, as everything sped back up, and Luke's green lightsaber dipped through Vader's chest, exterminating him near instantaneously. As the wound stripped his life away from him, Anakin beneath the mask realized the fool he was all along. The moment he killed Dooku was when he became Tyrannus. Vader may have had a shiny new name, but it was the same role, a temporary fill until Sidious found a suitable replacement. His eyes looked through the mask into the brazen and fury of his son's eyes, and the gaze shifted past Luke to Sidious. There wasn't much that he could view, but Anakin's last sight would be two yellow eyes gazing down on him from above, a life of slavery for nothing. Luke gripped the saber back and stumbled, regaining his footing and feeling the power of his abilities. Vader was no more. The connection to Anakin that Luke had been chasing had simply disappeared. He was looking at the husk of an evil body, one of a creature who had done damage to billions of people. Luke looked down to the saber, and he felt a rolling chill swarm down his spine. His shoulders tensed and his eyes turned back to Sidious, who descended the stairs. He clasped his hands together with a heinous smile, telling Luke that he had done well. Sidious felt as he did when Tyrannus was born, following Yaddle's death, of course. The situation was very similar in some aspects, though he was not finished. Palpatine stood far enough away to keep himself safe as he asked Luke how he felt. His eyes looked to the floor and then to Palpatine, as he expressed that he felt powerful. It felt right. Luke's hand gripped the saber harder as he looked to the Emperor. Sidious nodded his head, expressing to his boy that they must leave. He had foreseen a great trouble, one that would beset them both. Luke tried to stop him because his friends were in danger. Sidious stopped by Luke's side, placing his hand gently on his shoulder and telling him kindly that this was just beyond their grasp. The lies of the Jedi had been sewn deep into him, but if what he was feeling was true, then they must act fast. The aging Jedi Master who had clearly instructed him had prepared a Jedi ritualistic curse. Luke didn't understand, but they hadn't the time. If they didn't act now, then they wouldn't be capable of saving his friends, if they even still were his friends. They eventually found themselves in the hangar bay and departed inside a Palpatine shuttle, which landed inside of an escort fleet that would abandon the system before the second Death Star could be destroyed. The entire time, Palpatine was concocting an evil plan to force Luke down the dark path. It would work to perfection, too. He had absolutely no doubt in forcing Luke's hand here. He knew that Luke's trust was in the Jedi, and his approach to breaking said trust would be much different than it ever had been before. However, he did understand that to fully stop the rise of the light, he would need to use his vast resources. Sidious's return to Coruscant would come with a message for the galaxy. The Rebellion, or as they now called themselves, the New Republic, had lied. They were preparing for an assault on the galaxy. The destruction of the second Death Star, or what Palpatine was calling it, Preacher Station, was an assault on the future tranquility of their empire. He promised them a secure future. All he asked was for their continuous trust and support. Luke, on the other hand, sat inside the Imperial Palace during these remarks. He and the Emperor spoke to each other during their trip from the Death Star. So much of the reason Luke didn't attack the Emperor outright was because of confusion. He had killed in vain, something he had never truly done. He felt power, anger, and fury, and he didn't have anything but Palpatine there to guide him through it. The Jedi had helped him greatly, but there was something that they weren't, which was alive. Sidious came to him like a friend. He had done nothing but suggest Luke use the dark side, though there was one main concern for Luke, his friends, and his sister. They were such an important part of the last 4 years of his life. They had found him at his lowest and lifted him individually. Han, Leia, Lando, and Chewie were his best friends, and he left them at Endor. Though it did bring him some sense of peace to know that the Death Star was destroyed, this must have meant that his friends had survived in some way. Luke was approached by the Emperor following his remarks as Palpatine sat down across from him, asking him to express how he felt. His power was raw and strong, yet he seemed lost or confused. Luke looked across at the Emperor, trying to piece things together, trying to understand how this was possible or why he was here. Palpatine told Luke that he was confused, and he could understand. When he first used his anger to strike down an overbearing force, he was confused himself. But he had to face the darkness alone, because the Jedi had rejected him. They had the ability to help him, and they didn't care at all. Luke looked up as the Elder Emperor told him to trust him. These feelings were natural, and they were right. Luke's decision to strike Vader down was rightly placed, and he was here to guide him through these feelings. Luke told Palpatine that he couldn't support being a friend to him. His regime was evil, it was brooding, and it tried to kill all of his friends. They killed his aunt and uncle, they abandoned them out on Tatooine. There was nothing he had ever seen over the past few years that could ever let him join this empire. Palpatine stood up. He sadly looked over and expressed with deep sorrow in his voice that he learned a terrible truth. Luke's life had been a lie. What did he mean? Luke looked up, moving to his feet, trying to understand what Palpatine meant. The confusion of darkness was seeping deep into Luke's soul. Palpatine stepped forward, asking his young friend to join him on a walk. He expressed that Vader had acted erratically numerous times. It was why he encouraged Luke to kill him, because Vader was capable of destroying the good in the galaxy. He said that Owen and Beru were slaughtered from a personal vendetta. The man named Anakin Skywalker was corrupt, evil, and untrustworthy. Owen and Beru had lied for his safety. Ben Kenobi had lied to betray him. Sidious told the story. He placed Anakin into the Vader suit because he was too dangerous in any other form. Luke asked what he meant, believing what had been told to him, believing that his feelings were correct about Vader, that Anakin Skywalker was still alive. Palpatine shamefully expressed that Vader was not as cruel as Anakin, and the curse of the Jedi, the ancient one that had tormented his mind, left his emotions and feelings out of control even through his transition into Vader. Palpatine told Luke that what he felt inside the throne room of the Death Star was the first time he truly let himself breathe. He allowed the darkness, his natural affinity, to flow through him. Luke again asked what he meant, and Palpatine turned towards his young friend, reminding him of the limitations of the Jedi. This was his first true time stepping outside the bounds of the Jedi Code. He begged that Luke trust him, because he wanted to help. Luke nodded his head, a little confused as he did. He walked with Palpatine, who guided him to a room so that he could finally sleep. Palpatine forced Luke to remain awake since the Death Star, which was a little more than 24 hours, including the entire trip through hyperspace where they talked extensively. And by talk, it was more so Palpatine using the darkness he had within himself to influence Skywalker to fall deeper into said darkness. Now that Luke was asleep, he moved to the other side of the facility, so that a new enforcer could rise. The rebels were camped out in the Sullust area, based on fleet movements following their victory at Endor, thanks to Admiral Garrick Verzia's information dump. Palpatine stepped towards his secret apprentice, Mara Jade, and requested that she fulfill a task for him. She obeyed his orders and discreetly left. Sidious then immediately switched gears. He knew the way he would force Skywalker down the dark path, and it was unlike anything he ever tried before. His next move was to go to the ISB, an elite bureau that would have disbanded had Palpatine died following the Battle of Endor. He requested that they make quick moves against historical data, proving that certain people never existed, and certain events were manipulated to make Luke believe he was a Jedi, or that the Jedi path was the right decision. Palpatine quickly forced his hand as well, because he wasn't going to let this insignificant rebellion beat him in the way that they were currently planning. Fleets were dispatched from the core to suppress potential threats to the Mid-Rim. On the other hand, he had a new foe to worry about. Coruscant was devolving into chaos. Celebrations following the destruction of Death Star 2 were popping up across the galaxy. It's why Mon Mothma called herself the leader of the New Republic. They were trying to force a mass appeal to the galaxy. The new game was going to work if they got a little further. With riots across Coruscant rising out of nothingness, and outposts around the outer edge of the Empire facing the rise of rebel activity, Palpatine sent out enforcers to those lines to destroy the rise of these protesters. Martial law was going to be enacted, and the galaxy's hope would be stripped from it. Though aside from this, Palpatine had another plan, because he wasn't going to allow the galaxy to revolt and take control over everything he worked so hard for. Palpatine prepared his own contingency, one that differed greatly from the one he initially set up. On the outskirts of the Mid-Rim, Imperial fleets deployed were quickly preparing to strike down New Republic fleets. Due to the destruction of another superweapon, recruitment soared for Republic forces, though the Emperor's enforcer quickly got to work over Sullust. Due to the rising recruitment numbers and her relative secrecy, she was able to get into rebel lines without being identified as the Emperor's hand. Mara slipped down into rebel camps on the surface of Sullust and got in line with those ready to fight for the rebellion. She watched their moves with interest and prepared to use her master's teachings as her guide for her movements. She concealed her ability to use the Force and searched stealthily for her targets. Palpatine had given her very important instructions, and she followed them with care. Her task was to assist with the seduction of Luke Skywalker, and the best way to handle that was through forcing him to believe that what he had seen and lived through was a lie. Mara was here to execute those people who considered themselves friends of Luke, and those who were most influential on his life after joining the rebellion. The ISB would take care of the other side of things regarding that. Mara, in the middle of the night, would sneak out of the main rebel camp, avoiding guards around the makeshift compound. Her Emperor taught her well, as she slipped through the front gates and leapt over the walls and out into the landing field. She ducked behind some crates and looked over at the Millennium Falcon, which was hidden behind a number of X-Wings and Y-Wings. She removed her lightsaber and placed it together. It was broken apart so that she could pass the inspection. Her eyes gazed down at the illuminating crimson kyber crystal as it was placed into the ignition chamber. As she was putting the entire saber back together, she heard people talking, and she looked over. Lando was asking a rebel trooper if they had heard back from scouts regarding Luke's position, and they shook their heads. Han took a deep breath. The worry on his face was very heavy. He looked over to Leia and asked if she was still sure he was still alive, and she nodded her head, telling him that she felt that he was alive. She could feel him before the station exploded. Where he was, she was unsure of that. Chewie growled behind them, and 3PO stepped up with R2. He mumbled something robotic that Mara didn't hear. She couldn't believe her luck, all of her opponents right here in front of her. She smiled to herself as she slipped away from the crates and behind an X-Wing. Leia turned over thinking that she had seen something from the corner of her eyes. Han asked what it was, and she looked at him with curiosity, unsure of the answer herself, before telling them that they should get a move on. Lando nodded, leading the way back to the ship he no longer owned. The rest of the group walked behind him, as Han suggested that they check the deep core. If Luke was taken anywhere, it's clear the Empire didn't want him anywhere near the outskirts of Imperial territory. Lando turned around and walked backwards, asking who might want him, and Leia, still unsure, believed it had to be the Emperor or Vader, though no one was able to confirm whether Vader survived the Death Star or not. Mara continued walking on the outside of the ships. As she got closer to the Falcon, a flashlight shined across the ground and found her. She turned back with a quick reflex in fear, but her hand outstretched and she caught the guard by the throat, lifting him off the ground and choking him to death, before continuing. The engines on the Millennium Falcon activated and the ramp slowly lifted up. Mara turned on a heel and used all of her speed to propel herself into the air, using the top hatch of a Y-Wing as a booster, and slipped into the Falcon. No one inside would survive. Mara would fly the Corellian freighter into the hangar bay of Holm 1, where she would continue her attack on rebel leadership. She used the ventilation shafts to get to the bridge so that she could kill Mon Mothma and Admiral Akbar, as well as some other important crew members before abandoning the ship. On Coruscant, Palpatine was unaware of this assault on rebel leadership, which was outside of her orders. Regardless, he was speaking to Luke, who was now waking up. Palpatine had received a set of information from the ISB, proving that Luke hadn't lived part of his life. Sidious understood that Luke would have more clarity the following day, so throughout the night, the Dark Lord of the Sith prepared a ritual of his own. The irony of Sidious's move was the fact that he was spending his time concocting a Sith curse and telling Luke that a Jedi curse was plaguing his mind. Sidious was also able to set into place his own contingency. When Luke walked out of his room, the Sith plague was already in effect. Luke had no clue, but his mind was slowly being altered. A slight confusion here, another altered memory there, just the little things. Luke felt so much more confident than he did the day before, but Palpatine had already changed so much for him. Luke ignited his lightsaber to face down Palpatine once and for all, and the saber was crimson red. He looked down at it and wondered why the colors had changed. His eyes shifted to Palpatine, telling him that he would pay. The Elder Sith Lord pondered what was wrong, asking his young friend if he was alright. Luke, an individual so poised to kill the Sith Lord, was at a loss. What was happening here? He looked at his saber and turned it off, only to ignite it once more and see the crimson glow emanating out of it. Palpatine stepped towards him and asked if he was having another episode. Another episode? Luke looked over and asked what he meant. Palpatine guided Luke over to sit down on the stairs and told the royal guards to fetch him something to drink. Luke looked up and asked Palpatine what was going on here. He expressed it had been a long journey for him. These episodes were common, ever since the Jedi named Ben Kenobi killed his uncle and aunt on Tatooine. If it weren't for Palpatine's guards, he would have died in the deserts of the Outer Rim world. Luke looked over with confusion as Palpatine explained that they'd been training for years. He was the heir to his throne, and Luke shook his head. It couldn't be true. As they continued talking, rummaging through memories that Luke never had, as the old ones started to shift, he was introduced to someone new. Palpatine played this part expertly, knowing that to truly confuse Luke was to remove his initial supporting cast and force in someone who could be efficient at bringing him deeper into the darkness. He told Luke that this was Mara Jade, and she, like him, was an outcast, but he saved them. Mara wasn't fully aware of the plan that Palpatine had, but she knew that Luke had been a target of the Emperor for some time. She just believed that he had been turned to the dark side by his own will. Palpatine gave the two of them a very limited time to be around each other, as he wanted to focus on Luke's former memories and his true seduction into darkness. All the while, the Empire continued to make its moves against the New Republic, who, now without its greatest heroes and leadership, were dwindling morally. They had thousands of new recruits, but they had no one to follow. Mara Jade's strike at the height of the New Republic influence was a crippling blow the Empire needed to make its resurgence in the eyes of the public. Protesters from Coruscant to Bothawai continued to run rampant in the streets until Imperial troopers were deployed and put an end to their fight. Tyranny was unnatural, but Palpatine didn't care. He had his own plans for ensuring his own longevity. The fight with the New Republic would expand into several months of standoffish, Cold War-esque combat. The rebels reverted back into hit-and-run tactics as they tried to rebuild their leadership around General Syndulla. Commander Gideon was sent into the Outer Rim to lead Imperial forces against the threat. Palpatine knew he couldn't take the rebels as a lesser foe, and instead of focusing on important super weapons, he held those resources for his work on Exegol. Instead, he planned on rebirthing an idea held by Grand Admiral Thrawn. The blueprints for the TIE Defender would be brought to Coruscant, where protesters were transformed into slaves, so that they might contribute to the new Imperial Navy. At the same time, inside the Imperial Palace, Luke became attached to Mara, as she became the only permanent individual in his life aside from Palpatine. The Sith Lord continued to bring people into his life for a week or so and take them out, for him to never see them again. This was done specifically to assist with the illusion of his past life. Yoda and Ben Kenobi were not influences, they were demons to be feared, to hate and destroy. Luke and Mara were able to kill Jedi intruders, which were just slaves that had exceptional talent in the Force and given lightsabers. These little events were all used to trigger Luke's brain into thinking he was living with Palpatine and training with him the entire time. And because of the way Palpatine set Luke up, with a continuous confusion, he knew that the little empathy Mara had would rise. She was trained to exude evilness and thrive off the pain of others, but Palpatine was able to set the two of them up in a Florence Nightingale type of situation. It wasn't caregiver and patient per se, but it was close enough for the two of them to fall for each other as they continued to grow in their power. As this happened, Luke's episodes, quote-unquote, started to decrease exponentially. Palpatine then, to ensure he could elongate his own influence, put the ISB into the power of the Empire. They were going to pull the strings politically, militaristically, economically, and socially. The Dark Lord therefore used Mara's and Luke's bond as a reason to stay within the dark side of the Force, and trade their hate for the dying Jedi Order and New Republic for hatred for himself. He knew that they would naturally value each other over him because of their love, another selected choice of his. Palpatine meticulously planned everything so that his quote-unquote death came with easy transition. In the months since Endor, the protests had gotten worse and General Syndulla became a legitimate threat to Imperial interests. She may have had a child, but she took command over Alliance personnel with relative ease, and she smashed Commander Gideon at a battle outside of Eridu, which ended up completely destabilizing an Imperial space station and killing Gideon in one attempt. The New Republic had power, and if the Empire wanted to maintain its complete control over the galaxy, it needed a new face, which is exactly why he had Luke and Mara. One of his Strandcast clones from Exegol was brought to Coruscant on the day of his death. Luke and Mara had been planning it out due to their intense infatuation for the other and their growing hate for him. Palpatine held a public speech with them behind him, and he was killed in front of everyone. Instead of Imperial troopers turning on Luke and Mara, the people celebrated Palpatine's execution. Sidious wasn't pleased with this, but he could handle a shot to his ego so that his empire could remain strong. The biggest issue for Palpatine was the transformation of Luke Skywalker. See, his name for the rebels had become synonymous with the word of hero, while the Empire saw him as a terrorist. Now, this is why Palpatine ordered his own execution publicly. Luke would need mass appeal to Imperials through set-up skirmishes and battles that were displayed publicly for people to see. So his role from hero transformed into Imperial enforcer, while the rebels would see him take the Imperial throne with his partner as an act of treachery. This created a pull for the rebels to hate the new Emperor and a desire to follow new leadership for citizens, because it was capable of defeating Palpatine. All the other Imperial contingencies were going out the window. No Operation Cinder or anything else. The ISB would bow to Luke and Mara's new empire, but they would not fully follow his leadership. Instead, they would tell him that they were here to support him, and because Amnesia Luke had no clue on how to lead, he was assisted. The ISB made Luke's empire appear newer with policies that would help the people, but it was the exact same thing as Palpatine's empire. Imperial projects for the year 5 ABY were set up to enforce Palpatine's rule through a different lens. The most integral part of that was getting the galaxy to fall for Luke and Mara. They added a sense of humanity to the role of Emperor and Empress. Two young lovers taking control away from a decrepit old man. And yet, it was no different politically. Luke was Palpatine's number 2. He just had no power, something neither he or Mara knew. This wasn't because they didn't have the intelligence to know. It was because everything was set up to perfectly confuse them. The ISB, Grand Admiral Gallius Rax, Grand Admiral Rey Solon, and even Masameda were placed at the helm of the Empire to run it for these two. Their role was to be political sweethearts for the Empire, to take attention away from the Republic, and the war to focus on them. It was a concentrated plan, and Palpatine didn't enact it until he knew the two of them were actually starting to fall for each other. The irony of everything is the fact that Palpatine's grand scheme was to prepare his final order to return to the galaxy as leader of the Empire with a new body. His main focus was now to perfect the cloning of the Exegol facilities, and he'd spend all of his time working with the scientists there, while the ISB continued to maintain his empire. The time for Luke and Mara became very challenging for them. They were now in control over a vast empire, and they attempted to make a peace treaty with the Rebel Alliance. This was actually a setup plan by the ISB. They faked an entire battle for the two new rulers of the empire. Luke and Mara went to meet with General Syndulla, and the destroyer came under attack. A rebel fleet blitzed them, and they were almost killed until Grand Admiral Rey Solon's fleet dropped out of hyperspace to save them, expressing that she was waiting just in case this was a trap. As it turned out, it was. Realistically, Emperor and Empress were never in any danger, but the fact that they thought they were brought them to wage full war against the Republic. The entire event was documented too, because Luke and Mara believed it to be a profound moment in history for the galaxy. This was completely unplanned by Palpatine's regime, but the recorded event was released by the Imperial Palace, and it proved to the galaxy that the rebels were just that, rebels. They shouldn't be treated as an opposition government, just a group of insurgents. The people of the galaxy reacted with intensity. Luke and Mara sent everything they had after the rebel freedom fighters, and the New Republic were left unable to do anything about it. Hera's forces started to get pinned down, and with the release of the TIE Defender, it was over for the Alliance. The Defender was seen as Luke and Mara Jade Skywalker's released weapon. Oh, it was glorious for the two lovers. Their wedding was also seen across the galaxy on the eve of the New Republic's destruction. A triumphant victory and an illustrious wedding for all to celebrate. After the broken peace treaty, rebel sympathizers stopped protesting. New recruits abandoned the path, even snitching on rebel bases and fleets. It was an all-out political war against the Alliance, because without Palpatine and a new strong leadership, aided by precise propaganda, the Empire was able to flourish. Luke and Mara were able to inspire a cultural shift within the Empire. because their love was public. This love created a sense of euphoria, mixed with the destruction of the rebel insurgents. Palpatine, hidden in the unknown regions, prepared for his return. He was able to trade his body for a new one, and begin his own new clone warriors. But then he realized something. He had conquered this galaxy. The ISB and Grand Admirals and Grand Moffs would continue serving his rule, and if they trusted him, which they did, he needn't return to the galaxy to seize it with a different face. He had conquered one galaxy. That was more than enough for him. Palpatine's decision then shifted. He knew that one galaxy was more than enough, so why not make it two? The Final Order fleet was years away from completion, but once it was finished, he was set to make his grand move to another galaxy. Who knows what he could find, but he could rise above just one simple galaxy and elongate his rule. The Skywalker family started to grow on Coruscant. Mara and Luke would have Jaina and Ben Skywalker to add to their ranks, a brother and sister. The Force attempted to bring two lives into their family, as hope that they could be changed to the light. But there was a miscalculation from the Force. Mara and Luke's love was forged through darkness. They were connected through the plague of the Force, not from its light. Jaina and Ben would be simple additions to their darkness, though the galaxy would rejoice in the welcoming of these two new children at separate times, and what it meant for the longevity of the Empire. Palpatine made contact with his loyalists within each branch of it, and informed them what he wished to continue as their Emperor, but from another galaxy. He insisted on an intergalactic empire, one stronger than anything the universe had ever seen. They, still trusting their Emperor, agreed to his terms. The ISB was able to change their leadership style as they wished, which they would slightly change some little things, but most of it remained the same. Luke and Mara continued to be the leaders of the Empire, but they would remain completely unaware of their loyalty to a much larger system growing, though these simple truths would be slowly instated into the heirs of their empire. Mara and Luke, on the other hand, would trust their loyalists with the royal children and begin a crusade across the uncultured territory of the galaxy. They believed that forced integration into their system was the best way to reduce the rise of future rebellions. So for years, they would maintain relationships with their children, but they would focus on the continuous growth of their own empire. All the while, Palpatine expanded the Final Order outwards from Exegol, invading neighboring systems with a fleet fully capable of destroying everything that came their way. This did include their run-in with the Yuzing Vong. With a Legion General Pride by his side, Lord Sidious would conquer an already dead galaxy before making a move onto one that wasn't dead. Their war with the Vong wouldn't last very long, due to the sheer strength of the Zyston-class Star Destroyers. They used their super cannons on unsuspecting foes and shredded through the defenses and fleets. Palpatine's intergalactic empire would mirror the Jade Skywalker Empire in the regular galaxy. Luke and Mara would be responsible for the deaths of all former Jedi, ending their order permanently. And their lack of interest in religious orders would lead to the Sith remaining a Palpatine attribute. While the Knights of Ren and Barrando sages would exist, they wouldn't be of interest of the two lovers. Emperor and Empress would maintain control over their galaxy with a firm hand. The ISB, Masumeda, and their eventual replacements would continue to put out an empire that truly took care of the galaxy around them. It was a system that seemed fragile because of its tyranny, but in all actuality it was strong. The changing of the guard with these external systems went with difficulty, especially because those loyal to Emperor Luke and Empress Mara would be killed or sent away if they couldn't be kept quiet about Palpatine's real regime. The loving leadership of Mara and Luke was what unified the galaxy. They would retire away from leadership when their first child found love, that being their daughter Jaina. She would take on a husband, and due to her lineage being the one of purity, coming from the Emperor and Empress themselves, she would take on her mother's title. Her older brother, having not married yet, would remain a strict enforcer within the Imperial Regiment of the Outer Rim and Mid-Rim. Ben's place would forever remain a part of the lineage of the Royal Palace, but he wouldn't receive the role of Emperor in his life, as would be passed on to Jaina's son. Mara and Luke retired to Chandrilia, and enjoyed the rest of their life in bliss and in darkness, as their children started to get into contact with Emperor Palpatine, and fully establish the connectedness of an evil regime, one fully loyal to the one and only true Sith Lord. And that, my friends, is a pretty dark story right there. Special thanks to all of our patrons: Wells, Darth Maelstrom, Ozpin, Darth Vitiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Angel Dust, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick 5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tib, CC2024, Gallivan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granite D. Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Colin Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlinger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny Naguin, Sense Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Youngling Slayer 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Lakes of Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Man with 3 First Names, Darkseid46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Giveaway, almost there, less than 100 left. Let's get that thing going. I want to give you some starter stars. It's pretty cool. Anyways, let's talk about this story. The concept of tackling Luke turning to the dark side is always challenging. Luke is like super hopeful, optimistic guy, and I think the best way to do that is going with confusion. I think Luke, if he had killed Vader in that moment, would feel really confused. He's right there. He's like right about to kill him, and he almost does, and then Palpatine laughs, and he's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. I think if he does it, I think he would have such a confusion that I think Palpatine would be able to play off it. And a lot of the story in my mind is Palpatine's psychological war on Luke, and convincing him that the Sith way is the way he was always a part of ever since Owen and Brew's death. The only change is that he just makes Luke believe that the Jedi did it. A lot of it's just insane gaslighting that we see Palpatine do with Anakin, but just kind of like steroided up, like on the roids all the way. Also, I know Jaina is Han and Leia's daughter. I just thought the name would be pretty cool to use. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always, my friends, may the Force be with you.